Who would have thought that the Conservatives, who came into this campaign with a 20-point lead, would have lost most of that, and that support floated to the Liberals? There were a couple factors there. One, of course, is Donald Trump. His really predatory actions and remarks about Canada, down to the level of renegotiating perhaps even the border, water sharing arrangements, that sort of thing, to also you know insulting Canadians and saying that they'd be better off as part of the United States. It really triggered a lot of patriotism here in Canada. But he threw Mark Carney and the Liberals a lifeline by doing what he did. Canadians rarely surprise the world, and that happened yesterday, where the counting showed the Liberals winning, for now at least, a minority government. The private broadcaster CTV declared they would be a minority about, I think, around 11 p.m. Eastern time. Voting is still underway because there was some very complicated counting to be had, but it does look like it will end up with the Liberals as a minority government. And crucially, Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, as prime minister. Of course, when Justin Trudeau stepped down, Mark Carney was sworn in, but he was not an elected prime minister. Now he is. This is his first time as an elected politician, avoiding all attempts in the past to drag him into the House of Commons. Now, what's interesting too, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the opposition Conservatives, did not win his seat here in the Ottawa area. So that almost for sure means that he will be on his way to political purgatory, and the Conservatives will have to rally quickly to find a new leader, possibly even a female, of which they have many very, very suitable candidates. So minority status, that means the ruling Liberals will have to make quick alliances with other opposition parties, probably the Bloc Québécois, the Sovereigntist Party, which has, I believe, around 23 seats. And this will be crucial for them to pass legislation in the House of Commons. Whoever leads his king's loyal opposition party, the Conservatives, will have to decide quickly whether they're going to rally around Mark Carney and his Team Canada approach to fight a very predatory Donald Trump, who of course wants to make Canada the 51st state, or spend the next 6 months trying to topple the government and have another election. I think we'll probably see the former kind of shift, at least for the time being. Also worth noting, in the past few days, remarkably, Donald Trump was pretty much silent on Canada, although that ended yesterday. Sorry, that ended Sunday and into the hours of Monday morning, when he tweeted, basically, vote for me, I'm going to be your next leader. Canada has the chance to be like heaven if you support becoming the 51st state. So I think one of the factors that was on the minds of voters, those who did not participate in the record numbers in advance polls, that was on their minds, that no, we don't want to become 51st state, we need a strong leader. Secondly, on the last day of the campaign, there was that tragic vehicle attack at a Filipino festival in Vancouver. That may have shifted more people towards Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, because he was seen as the more law and order candidate, for example, advocating life sentences for repeat offenders for mass murders. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of voters here are really, really keen to see a leader deal quickly with crucial bread and butter issues: housing affordability, immigration, the cost of living, for example, the price of groceries, a crumbling health system, and of course, law and order. Finally, on this point, Mark Carney, as I noted earlier, is an economist, a former central banker. So on that score, he's probably seen as the most capable to take Canada away from the economic abyss and return prosperity as much as he can to this country.
And this wasn't necessarily a big loss numerically for the Conservatives in Canada, was it? But it's a pretty bitter outcome regardless.
Yeah, we started seeing that very early in vote counting as the Atlantic provinces results started coming in. It did not look good for the Liberal Party. They were losing ridings they should have won. They did spend quite a bit of resources out there. And then, of course, as we headed into the vote rich provinces of Quebec and Ontario, things swung more decisively in favor of the Liberals. But what was interesting was almost the complete annihilation of the pro Labor New Democratic Party. Of course, they were the party that helped propped up Justin Trudeau's government with a working arrangement in the House of Commons. They, I think, at one point held 8 seats in Atlantic Canada. They emerged out of that region with nothing. So they are struggling to retain party status. And I think we will also see political obituaries written not only for Pierre Poilievre, but for their leader, Jagmeet Singh. The Green Party, I believe, ended up with one, possibly 2 seats. So that was interesting to watch too. But it'll be, a bit of a fresh look to the House of Commons. And I think at the end of the day, what we ended up with is healthy for Canada because as a Liberal government, there will be checks and balances. The opposition parties should look very carefully at legislation they propose. And then also, I think are gone are the days of the Trudeau government where they blocked in a very kind of pitbull way committees and the House of Commons looking into ethics lapses, that sort of thing. So best of all worlds, I think, happened for Canada. So kudos to the voters here.
Well, as you mentioned before, there the impact of Trump on this election really can't be understated, can it?
Who would have thought that the Conservatives, who came into this campaign with a 20-point lead, would have lost most of that, and that support floated to the Liberals? There were a couple factors there. One, of course, is Donald Trump. His really predatory actions and remarks about Canada, down to the level of renegotiating perhaps even the border, water sharing arrangements, that sort of thing, to also you know insulting Canadians and saying that they'd be better off as part of the United States. It really triggered a lot of patriotism here in Canada. But he threw Mark Carney and the Liberals a lifeline by doing what he did. Now, of course, as time went on in the campaign, you know, you walk around any Canadian city, where I am sitting in Ottawa right now, the degree of homelessness out on the streets, the urban decay, the numbers of people who clearly who have mental health issues, epidemic levels in cities like Canada. And here in Ottawa as well, I think Canadians will be looking for a tougher hand. For example, a lot of federal civil servants here have been told, look, guys, you have to return to work at least 3 days a week. A lot of them are ignoring that. It's really had a knock on effect in Ottawa, especially where the presence of civil service is very high. It's turned the downtown core into ghost town. So that sort of thing as well. But it is really a time in history that we have not seen her before, where Canadians are scared not only for putting food on their tables and keeping a roof over their heads, but also whether Trump will actually act on their threats. We are at a time where a lot of Canadians, including myself, are thinking twice about crossing the border. We have the longest border with the United States because of what might happen if we're seen to be, for example, in opposition to Donald Trump. And finally, immigration. This came up yesterday in some of the interviews. Is there is a pretty big trickle of illegal immigrants coming across the border from the United States into Quebec, and also the issue of criminality, illegal guns flowing over the border. What can be done with that? These are clearly issues that we need a good, robust working relationship with the United States. And if things go sideways between Carney and Donald Trump, it won't be good for Canada.
So it would be reductive then, really, to say that this vote was just a rejection of Donald Trump.
Yeah, it was partially a rejection of Donald Trump, but also really, really big issues of especially being able to survive in Canada when costs have become so high. You see, one of the one of the memories I think people have of Justin Trudeau is that he was not only arrogant and part of the Davos elite, he loved spending more time overseas where he was fawned over by the media than here in Canada, where he had to deal with crucial issues. And that's what gave Pierre Poilievre such a commanding lead before the election was called. There was such animosity towards Trudeau. Had he not stepped down, it would have been probably the Liberals that would have been headed to political purgatory. So there were a number of factors here. But in the last day of voting, which of course was Monday, I think when people went into those ballot boxes, of course, Trump was a factor, but I think it was overtaken by those daily issues that all Canadians are faced with. I mean, I'll give you a personal example. I myself, I mean, I'm a patriotic, loyal Canadian. I was born here and raised here. Is I feel I've been priced out of my own country, and I'm seeking kind of safer ground elsewhere in the world because it's just really, really impossible to make ends meet. And the other thing you'll hear from those who voted for the Conservatives is this kind of atmosphere of political correctness that was forced upon them by Trudeau. For example, we're not allowed to say mankind; it has to be humankind, things like that. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of time to watch, and who knows? I mean, like I said, if the Conservatives decide to play hardball with Carney, we could be headed back to the polls in another 6 months.
And what just finally, Michael, what does this mean for Canada's relationship with Europe, especially that coalition of the willing group of nations that have pledged support for Ukraine as the US support becomes less reliable?
Yeah. Well, we're living in interesting times, aren't we? Because there's also been talk of perhaps Canada severing its ties completely with the United States. For example, we had the North America Free Trade Agreement, which was seen as inviolable and a very central part of our economy, to becoming part of the European Union because of our historic ties, because they seem to be a lot more level-headed than the Trump administration. I think there'll also be a push towards resetting our ties with China and India as we have to diversify our economy. But yeah, there is the war in Ukraine. So important to point out that Canada has the biggest Ukrainian diaspora uh, after Russia, and there's a lot of pressure here from the traditional diaspora, as and also the millions of new arrivals who came from since the start of the war to be tougher on Russia. And for example, there's something like I believe it's 23 billion Canadian dollars in frozen Russian assets being held in Canadian currency. Uh, Pressure on the Liberal government to hand that over to Ukraine to help fund the war effort, to help fund reconstruction. That is apparently something the Liberals were not keen on, but the Conservatives were really pushing. There's also going to be pressure on the government of the day to boost military aid to Ukraine. When Justin Trudeau went into day one of the full scale invasion, he said sanctions is what's going to push Mr. Putin back. Well, Russia has become incredibly resilient against sanctions. So we'll see. But the other thing, as a Canadian, I'd like to see is Canada go back to resuming its stance on the international stage as a middle power. We've lost our microphone, so to speak, in the United Nations, on in other international fora. But Canada will be hosting the G7 summit this summer in Alberta, Canada, and that could be an opportunity for Canada to not only push the issue of frozen Russian assets, because there's something like 300 billion US in total, most of it in Europe, but also taking a tougher stance towards Russia. And also, how do we, as kind of the remaining survivors of the rose-based international order, the remaining cheerleaders, stand together to, fight thugs ranging from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin to leaders in Iran, Pyongyang, and elsewhere. It's a very, very, very challenging time, but I'm hoping that Canada again can resume its position that it's been known as traditionally as a middle power, and influence the agenda on the international stage.